Good morning, and thank you for joining today's Protecting Remote Users from Fraud and Exploit webinar. My name is Michael Holden from Bytes. I'm pleased to be joined today by Richard Davis, a cybersecurity strategist from Proofpoint, who will be taking us through the bulk of today's presentation. So just some quick housekeeping. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout the session. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please do post any questions in the questions window, and they will be fielded during the Q&A. This is a purely strategic discussion. Any commercials can be discussed with your Bytes account manager after the session, and everyone will receive the recording after the session. Lastly, we do have a feedback survey at the end of the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to complete it, as we use this to make sure that our webinars are still hitting the mark. The agenda for the webinar: firstly, a short overview of Bytes. We will then move into the majority of the presentation from Richard, which will speak about why and how attackers have shifted how they attack people, the new risks remote workers face from rising exploits and fraud, how best to see and mitigate these risks to protect your people and brand, and more, which will then be followed by our Q&A. So, who are Bytes? Bytes enable effective and cost-efficient technology sourcing, adoption, security, and management of software, hardware, and cloud services. Bytes have a wide range of expertise, including licensing and SAM, data management, and security. On the security side, we have a wide range of technology partners with the highest level of accreditation with the majority of our vendors. We offer a variety of technical services, hold multiple accreditations, and a boast award-winning delivery, which we're extremely proud of. But that's enough about us. Let's talk about protecting remote users and your brand. As mentioned previously, we are joined by Richard Davis, a cybersecurity strategist from Proofpoint. Bytes are a platinum partner of Proofpoint, and who are leaders in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for security awareness training. And so we felt they are the correct partner to bring this message to you. With that, over to you, Richard.
No problem. Thank you very much for that introduction. Just give me a second just to share my slides, and I'll get going. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for Bytes for inviting us to present this morning. Now, this session really, I think, is very topical right now, and it's based on a lot of the conversations that I've started having. In my role as a cybersecurity strategist, I talk day in, day out with a lot of our customers to not only keep them updated on the threat landscape, but also talk to them about how they can best use not only Proofpoint's technology, but to also integrate Proofpoint with a number of other vendors to ultimately look to see how they reduce the risk that they have and they face as an organization. And many customers have been asking me the same question, and that is, in a nutshell, we've done a great job of managing to get our workforce back working as they should do. We've had a big shift to remote working. We're stable, but we now need to see what risks have we introduced in this new way of working. In the rush to change the way we're working, we haven't gone through the normal due diligence that we do to actually ascertain, have we increased our risk level in doing so? And now they're retrospectively asking for advice on how to go about doing that, understand any new risks that they may have exposed themselves to, and look at what technology and people-based solutions they can actually potentially deploy over the next few months to mitigate those risks. So a quick introduction from myself. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. Previously held some technical architect roles at Proofpoint, and I've been sitting on our cybersecurity strategy team for about 3 or 4 years now. I'm going to break this session down over the next 40 minutes or so into a few different areas. I'm going to talk about the general trends we've seen from a threat point of view over the last few months, specifically how we've seen threat actors heavily leverage COVID-based lures. In fact, at its peak, we saw that 80% of every single threat that we saw contained a COVID-based lure, and that's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this before. in the 15 years that we've been running email security services, where so many, such a huge proportion of lures are based on just one theme. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail around how we're providing our customers with the visibility that they need, some best practices around how you can actually ascertain what your new risk is, and also go through a series of both, as I say, technical solutions, but also education, people-based solutions to help educate your users to, again, mitigate that risk from a human level. Then going to talk about what we believe are some of the predictions we're going to see, some of the lures that we're going to see threat actors start to use, so that actually you can be proactive in notifying your people in advance as to what we should expect. And we'll finish out with some general recommendations. So let's jump straight in then and start talking about the trends that we're seeing. And I've just pulled up data from our internal systems. This is a graph that shows trend types across all of the threats that we see across email, our cloud security platforms, and our security awareness training platform based on user submitted samples. So even if somebody's just a customer of our security awareness training, they're able to submit threat samples to us for analysis. So this is across all of our product range. And it's quite clear that actually, if we look back to pre the pandemic at the very start, nothing's really changed from a threat type and volume point of view. This represents the normal waves that we've seen. We've not seen an increase in volume. We've seen a fairly typical representation of this. So I think the first key takeaway is that we've not seen a huge uptick in malware, for instance, or credential phishing. And I think that's interesting in a couple of ways, but I think it really just highlights that from that respect, it's really business as usual from a threat actor's point of view. However, if we actually look at this in a different way and we start looking at the threat actors involved, again, we track the threat actors based on a TA number. So that's what's referenced at the bottom. Again, we've seen the same threat actors active in the market. Some of these are nation state advanced persistent threat actors. Some of these are large cybercriminal gangs who are simply out for monetary gain. But the interesting thing is, across the board, even if we start with the most prevalent threat actor out there in terms of volume to the smallest, we've got this huge representation in COVID-based threats and lures. We've seen from one of the highest threat actors out there, attacks against organizations with fake bills relating to COVID, sometimes in local language. We've seen lures from different threat actors using face masks and thermometer offers. We've seen some that are discussing World Health Organization directives and using that as a lure. So the massive change that we've seen is that pretty much across the board, every threat actor has shifted to using COVID-19 based lures in their attacks. And the reason they've done this, and the reason why this is still happening today, is that they're extremely successful. If we look at the statistics from our threat simulation product within our security awareness training platform, we put some COVID-based samples in there for customers to use. Now, I think there's two camps as to whether you should be using COVID lures to test your customers, and I'm not going to go into that debate today. I think that's up to individuals to decide whether they test their people with that sort of lure. But for those that have, typically we've seen about a 2x, so a 200% rise in the success rate. So twice as many people have fallen and have been clicking COVID-based lures than the typical lures that you would test your employees with. And therefore, the threat actors will continue to do this, and they'll continue to evolve the threats against organizations in this way. Now, I've been talking so far about threats that are typically coming in via email, because that's 90–95% of the threat vector. But there's a couple of other key things that we need to talk about. And one of those is this growing issue of email account compromise. Being able to actually pretend to be or authenticate as an individual within an organization to get access to their Office 365 or G Suite accounts. And part of that is driven by credential phishing. But a big part of that has been this increase in simply account attacks using either brute force password attacks or what we call intelligent variants. So looking at the recent breach data, breach passwords from Dropbox and the like, and trying variants of those passwords. And a combination of those three has led to an increase in those account attacks. And the reason why we believe this is the case is because, again, so many people are working from home. They're not sitting behind a lot of the layers of protection that previously monitored access. With so many people connecting from all sorts of different locations now, it's much harder to actually pick out those anomalies than it was before, where the majority of people would be connecting through corporate IP address ranges, etc. And that's made it much easier for the attackers to actually stay under the radar. So I'm going to touch on how we can mitigate the risk associated to that later in today's session as well. So I said I've talked to our customers about the threat landscape and what they can do. And typically, as before the pandemic started, I would actually talk about this concept. And for those that haven't heard us talk about this before, we very much believe that as an organization, every organization shouldn't be looking at things from a perimeter point of view now. And I think this has just been highlighted more during this pandemic. But actually, we need to do the same as the attackers. The attackers are taking time to profile who they need to attack in the organization, who has the privileged access they need, understanding what teams they're in, what may be successful from a lure base, and actually starting to tailor their attacks. We've seen attacks via email coming into certain geographies, but more so a number of different business areas. We've seen financial services under attack from certain things. We've seen, unfortunately, a vast number of healthcare organizations coming under attack from ransomware-based attacks with very tailored lures that are relevant to healthcare organizations currently fighting this battle. It's an unfortunate state of events that we find ourselves in, where the threat actors are actually attacking the people that we need and are helping the most right now. So we really believe that organizations need to start looking at the risk from a people-based perspective. And that means actually profiling within your organization who you think is going to be attacked, how they're being attacked, and what privileged level of access they have. So just think about this and keep this in mind as I then run through a quick overview of the current spotlight. So what are we seeing out there? I talked about the fact that 80% of the lures we're seeing are COVID related. So let's look at a few of these trends. So first and foremost, we've seen this continued focus on credential phish. And this is not only stealing corporate credentials, but trying to steal credentials of potentially your customers, your business partners, and if you're an organization that's B2C, your consumers. And this is a great example of this. So this is an example that we picked up over in the Netherlands. This is targeting a very well-known bank, ING over there. And this, look, I guess most people on here don't speak Dutch, but it talks about the fact that they need to withdraw a certain number of debit cards because they can actually harbor the virus for quite a period of time. And they're actually going to be starting to issue antibacterial debit cards. Now, of course, this is not the case, but as a customer, you're going to be potentially fooled by this lure. And they're saying that more information can be found within the PDF. Now, you open the PDF, and yes, it does contain even more information. And then it contains a link to log in to request your card. Now, this is also a multi-stage attack, so it's designed to fool some of the basic email gateway solutions out there who aren't going to go 2 or 3 deep. You're not going to open a PDF and then view and look at a URL within the PDF. And sure enough, if you click that, you get taken to a phishing page that will then ask for your banking credentials. So again, if you're a B2C customer, a B2C organization out there, you really need to think about what your customers could be facing in terms of how could your brand be used? How could they create a COVID-based lure that might be attacking them? In the same way, we've seen examples of this where they're using COVID-based lures to simply fish for login credentials. An email notification saying, we've updated our company policy in terms of returning to work. Please open this PDF to view the latest information on how we're going to start reopening our offices. And that then takes you to a Office 365 login page to access the details, which is then going to siphon off corporate credentials. And that leads me on to the next area quite nicely, which is the fact that actually the threat actors continue to leverage legitimate file sharing sites to actually store their payloads. And in that last example I talked about, that PDF document can actually be stored within OneDrive, within that folder, which means that you can't, no organization can block all OneDrive or SharePoint access. And actually at its peak, we see that about 50% of all threats are actually hosted on either Microsoft or Google infrastructure on any given day. And this makes it much harder for people to actually potentially mouse over to do the checks that we've previously advised them to do to ascertain whether or not that URL is safe. There's no way of ascertaining whether one OneDrive link is safe compared to the next at the end of the day from a human point of view. Yeah. This next example here is another example of a multi-stage threat. This is actually one we observed over in Italy. This is actually mimicking the World Health Organization, coming from a known doctor. And of course, in today's environment, it's very easy to find out who those top people are within different organizations. This is actually the head of the Italian branch, with again a notification with an attachment. Important information on how to take precautions. And that opens a Word document, which actually then opens a macro, asks the user to run a macro, so a piece of code which will download malware. And this actually downloads a first piece of malware, which is just a downloader, just a very lightweight one that then downloads further stage malware. And we've seen a huge number of these utilizing World Health Organization. Unfortunately, at the start of the pandemic, the World Health Organization weren't actually authenticating their email, so their domain was open to abuse. They have actually since closed that off, fortunately, but that certainly didn't help situations. So, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but making sure that your domains can't be abused is one key thing to make sure that you're helping to protect your customers, your consumers from fraud with people mimicking your organization. Now, it doesn't stop there. We think about another common threat type that's in the news a lot, and that's business email compromise, simply tricking people into wiring money out of their accounts. And we see this day in, day out now in the news around organizations who have been tricked into wiring, in some cases, millions of pounds to incorrect accounts. In fact, I was looking at a sample from a customer just yesterday of this type of attack, simply saying due to changes in how we're processing data through COVID, we've actually had to process data through different accounts. Please update your account details. This is a great example of what we're seeing with these multi-stage attacks, where the first message simply tries to start a conversation. And before, we'd see a BEC email that just says, I'm stuck in a meeting, can you do something for me urgently? And of course, they've adapted, and now it's, I need you to do something for me urgently because 3 people have now tested positive in my town, so I now can't go out and I need you to do something for me. So again, just leveraging the current situation as part of their social engineering attempts. And then the 5th area that I just want to touch on is the continued use of third-party apps within both Office 365 and G Suite to again attack an organization. And this isn't specifically email related, but certainly they're using emails to drive people to open content that's going to make use of those third-party apps. So again, in this example, someone's attached a spreadsheet, a report in the spreadsheet, and this report is actually, cases of within the organization of COVID-19. And you open that report, and to view it, it actually needs a third-party add-in. So most people then, will just click add in that third-party plugin, or add-in, should I say, to Office 365. However, in this case, this third-party add-in has very wide permissions. In fact, so wide that this third-party app actually has full permissions to your entire OneDrive repository. So if you fall for this and you open this file and you install this app to view the content, the attacker has full access to pull every single file down from your OneDrive repository. And if you're a privileged user and you have access to sensitive data in OneDrive, then all of that information has been captured. So from a Proofpoint point of view, we've actually been tracking these from a campaign perspective. And what do I mean by a campaign? Well, a campaign to us is something that runs over a number of days, but not necessarily a number of weeks or a number of months. This is a way of actually grouping a huge number of variants of a message that look similar together. So it may be a slightly different wording or slightly different lure, but we know it's a campaign from a specific threat actor. And we've tracked 310 distinct campaigns over the last 6 to 8 weeks, simply leveraging this type of lure from the big threat actors. And we're talking millions and millions of messages here, in some cases over a million messages a day from these threat actors, covering this wide range of areas, utilizing malicious attachments, malicious URLs, credential phishing, utilizing this for business email compromise and email fraud, using COVID in file names, and even registering domain names related to this to again strengthen their attempt to socially engineer people. And this isn't something that is just widespread. We plot this and we look at this from a widespread or focus point of view and a global and regional point of view. And we see here that we've got very widespread campaigns talking about medical supplies, etc. We've got widespread campaigns that are targeting or using World Health Organization laws. But then again, we've seen regional ones that are just targeting certain countries. And more importantly, we've seen vertical-based ones. Specifically, we've seen an increase in threats against shipping companies, manufacturing companies, retail and banking companies, and then a completely separate set focused specifically on attacking healthcare organizations. So with that in mind, and an overview of the fact that they're pretty much using COVID-based lures across every attack type, what should an organization do? How should we actually assess what is our current risk profile? I touched on this earlier, but we very much believe that an organization needs to understand who their very attacked people are. Actually, you might be surprised to understand that in a given organization of a couple of thousand users, the top 20 people, so the top 1%, actually make up typically 50 to 60% of the risk for that organization based on the profiling that we do for our customers. And that means that actually, if you can focus on understanding who the most attacked people are, then you can actually look and get a good example of what sort of risk that you potentially face. And this is not only attacks via email, but this is also attempts to break into people's accounts as well. So that has to start with an understanding as to who is being attacked. Are they receiving very highly targeted attacks? Or is it just high volume attacks that aren't particularly targeted within that organization? Is it coming from a nation state threat actor, for instance? Because again, that's going to push that far up in terms of your priority. Secondly, we need to understand what sort of privileged access people have, and especially in the current time where people are now working remotely where they didn't before, and they're accessing that data remotely. It's a great time to actually ascertain, do they need access to that data? Do they need access all the time? But more so, if they need access to that data, do we need to now consider stepping up maybe authentication for those particular users? Nobody wants to actually change business practice and make it really hard for people to log in and out of systems. It breaks that day-to-day business practice. But if you can identify who the 10 most attacked people are in terms of having access to critical data, then maybe you do put step-up authentication in place for those 10 people. And then the vulnerability piece, and I think this is even more relevant over the last 2 months than it has been before. People are distracted. People are getting used to working from home, but they're distracted. They've got kids coming in and out if people have got a family. They're working in a different environment. Help desks aren't close by. They can't just simply walk over and say, is this okay? They can't go to their finance team and say, did you mean to do this? They can't walk over to somebody within their department and say, did you actually send me this? Is this from you? So we've seen an uptick in people failing phishing simulation over this time. We've seen an uptick in people being distracted in the way that they're working and oversharing data, because part of this is about data security as well, and governance of that sensitive data that you have. And we've seen an increase in alerts through our cloud security platform, monitoring for data sharing and oversharing of data. You know, you want to share a file with a colleague. Maybe you're going to put it on OneDrive, and you're then going to use the link sharing item. And it's actually very easy to accidentally overshare and share something publicly, so that link can then be accessed from anywhere. So getting a really good understanding of these three areas is a great way to now look and see, what is my new risk profile? What was it before and what is it now? Am I now subject to an increase in risk across all of the ways that I could be attacked? And ultimately, we can get to the point of view where we can actually start looking at this from a graphical point of view. Now, when we're profiling threats ourselves, we don't just simply look at volume. We actually are looking at the type of threat, how targeted it is, and scoring it accordingly. So third on the chart here is William Garcia. Now, he's third on the list of most attacked people, mainly by malware. And actually, if you double click in this and break it down, that was actually just 2 or 3 different emails, but they all came from one specific threat actor that is known to be targeting this industry. And that was particularly pertinent for this particular account, because this is the account manager that manages all of the healthcare organizations. So again, you can start understanding why people are attacking your organization a certain way, who they're attacking and how. And through this breakdown, we can then start thinking about what extra controls do we need to put in place, perhaps to secure particular users. William Garcia, for instance, he'd be a great candidate for the use of things like browser isolation technology, being able to actually isolate every single click he makes to a URL into an isolated browser in the cloud so it doesn't execute on his local machine. So in fact, he'd be immune to any malware that they're trying to inject through a URL, because it's only running in that isolated browser in the cloud that closes and reopens itself from scratch for every new site that he would visit. You know, in the same way, there's a whole series of people who are under heavy credential phishing here, of the corporate credential phish variety. In fact, only one person at the very bottom is under attack from a consumer credential phish. That's partly because of the way we weight it, because consumer doesn't hold the same weight in our system as a corporate credential phish. You know, I'm sure all of you would be far more concerned about somebody giving up their corporate Microsoft login compared to, say, their PayPal details. It'd be a bad day for that user, sure, but wouldn't be such an issue for you if a user gave up their own personal PayPal details. But this is a series of people that you can then target with security awareness training. You can actually say to them, we've observed that you are under a heavy attack from credential phish. You could even show them samples of the type of attack that they're facing, and you can then tailor the education that you're providing to them to be relevant to that type of attack. So how do we take this theoretical view of how you're being attacked as an organization, what risk you're under, and actually do something about it? And that's where we actually move on to start talking about the various controls that we can put in place. And I know this might seem a bit of an obvious one, but the more that we can stop at the front door, the better. The more threats that we can stop via email and stop account compromise from occurring, obviously the better off we are. We're never going to get to 100%, but there are a whole series of things that we can do to help here. We can deploy technology to block as many known threats as we can. More so, we can deploy email authentication technology such as DMARC to actually prevent the fraudulent use of our domains. Now, that's a key thing right now as we see organizations being used to attack their consumers. But we can do a better job of detecting those unknown threats via email. We can utilize not only malware and credential phish-based sandboxing, but we can use URL click time controls to either block that URL at the point the user clicks, or in conjunction with things like the browser isolation technology I talked about before, allow access to that particular URL, but in an isolated browser where we can actually turn off things like form and credential input until we're sure that that isn't a credential phishing site. We can turn off the ability to download content until we've sandboxed that URL and understood that that URL does not contain a specific threat. Interestingly, as an organization, we see currently about 8 billion unique different URLs a day, and it's impossible to sandbox that many, which is why we have to look proactively in protecting at the point of click time. But it doesn't stop there. Organizations can do a better job of automating the removal of messages that have been delivered to the user's mailbox. Again, there are certain threats that turn bad after delivery. So automating the removal of those, again, saves you time. It gives time back to your security teams, to your messaging teams, to really focus on those threats they need to look into. And at the same time, we can use this visibility to gain visibility into account compromise. We can monitor account access. Yeah, here at Proofpoint, we've been very lucky in that we have a huge amount of threat intelligence. We have about 120 threat researchers as well as 15 years of history in protecting email traffic. And what that means is we've got a great understanding of the threat actor's infrastructure. And again, we can use that to start looking for patterns, and we can start using that to actually start detecting potential account attacks and provide an early warning that certain users are under attack, that you're getting attacks against a particular user account. And then the final area, of course, is how we train people to be that last line of defense. And that really falls into a couple of key areas. Firstly, undertaking threat simulation exercises to help you assess the risk that your people face. And if you've got somebody that's continually failing a risk assessment, they are under attack because you've been able to ascertain that they're one of the heavily attacked people, and you know they have privileged access, then you've really got the worst case scenario there. And that's somewhere that you really need to then focus your efforts on. At the same time, we can then actually build a security awareness training program that really empowers our people to make a difference. So I want to drill down a little bit more into this last area, because I think this is so key right now. I've had so many conversations about how they can assess this new risk, not just from a threat perspective, but how they can use security awareness training and security assessments to understand what is this new risk we've got now so many people are working from home. And this is about actually either deploying a new one if you haven't really put something in place before, or just looking and again at what program do we have in place? How are we assessing risk? How are we pointing and running training for our organization? And this is designed to address a number of different areas, including business email compromise, just simply opening malware and credential phish-based attacks, but also understanding what people are doing in terms of compliance around regulatory needs. So this shift in the threat landscape has really introduced the following risks. Are users clicking on emails? Are they responding to BEC attacks? Secondly, are users securely losing cloud applications? Have passwords been compromised? Do threat actors actually have access? And again, an interesting observation from our own data is that last year we profiled companies over a 6-month period. And in a 6-month period, we observed that 45% of those organizations actually had an active threat actor with account access over that 6-month period. So that's a much higher statistics than actually we observed. So for the number of people on this call, just under half of you may well have a threat actor having access to your accounts right now, or have had access in the last 6 months. So that's really something to consider. At the same time, From a regulatory point of view, how is the way we're now working? How is the way we're now handling data changed? And are we still meeting those regulatory compliance requirements? And are we still keeping the data private that we need to keep secure under things like GDPR? So how do we efficiently change the user behavior? How do we educate people on these new risks? And that really comes down to a very simple process. We can boil it down to three things. Use the data that we have, plus data from security awareness training. So we can run assessments, we can run security assessments against our users for their general security knowledge. We can run threat simulation exercises. We can understand, right, where is this risk? Who faces this risk the most? And how do we build a tailored program to fix that? Rather than just assigning the same security training once a year to everybody, we can now actually use the time that we have. And typically organizations only dedicate 2 to 3 hours a year to this. We can break it into smaller chunks and maybe give them a 10-minute training module on the threats they're actually facing right now. And that means in 6 months' time, if it changes, you've got more time and you can actually then tailor that training to what they're then exposed to at that period of time. So then we can actually change user behavior by building a program that works. But then we also need to make sure that we give users the tools that they need to be able to report suspicious messages and deal with that. So that's the last part of this aspect. So for the sake of time, I want to move on and just touch on a couple of other different areas. And the next one of these is going into a bit more detail around how we can monitor for cloud account compromise and data loss. I've talked a little bit about the issues that we face here already today, but we've got this new risk around data security with data being stored in different locations. And organizations really need to understand, where does my data reside? Where does it now living? How are people interacting with this data? Is it being stored on local machines more than it was before? Is it being stored in cloud repositories? Is my data being exfiltrated inadvertently via cloud applications? Are people just trying to do their jobs and working in a different way? How do I make sure that actually where my data is being stored adheres to these compliance regulations? But at the same time, this third area that people need to consider around cloud security is getting visibility, especially now a lot of people aren't behind firewalls and web gateways, is into what shadow IT are they using? What applications that aren't sanctioned by the organization are they using? And finding a way of being able to allow tolerated apps and then block unapproved apps, even if they're not behind the traditional protection that has served companies well historically in the old model. And at the same time, they kind of need to understand what other devices are accessing. Are people using other machines now to connect into this infrastructure? And what is the risk associated there? Now, that really then leads on to a short discussion around remote access. So many organizations I've talked to have struggled initially in VPN capacity, and they have put in place other ways of accessing data, or they've opened up access into maybe cloud applications directly so that people don't have to go through a VPN to get to stuff. And that opens up a new level of risk. So at the same time, organizations are still trying to figure out how to best give things like contractors and business partner access to systems without actually overexposing data and overexposing systems. They want to move to a situation where they reduce the attack surface. With so many people connecting in via VPN and having everything exposed, they're looking at understanding what do people really need access to. I'm giving people access to everything, but actually one of my engineers actually only needs to have access to maybe a Jenkins system within our AWS instance. They don't need full access to everything. So how can I deploy technology that's going to provide fast access to the resources people need, yet still get visibility of that without having to route everything in and out of the corporate infrastructure? And I've seen that over the last couple of months, so many more companies are now starting to look at, and triggered really by capacity issues on VPN, is now the right time to consider a new approach to providing remote access using these new principles that we have, including things like zero trust security. Zero trust is often an overused word, but I believe it should be used in context of every application you're deploying. So actually starting with a remote access solution that assumes no access and only gives access to what you required is key to being successful here. Deploying a solution that's delivered as a service means that it scales up and scales down very quickly as needed and doesn't have the bottlenecks associated with a traditional VPN. But at the same time, we need to make sure that this works across all platforms, including both managed and unmanaged endpoints. So we need a solution that's not only client-based, but you need a solution that's browser-based as well, so that you can give access to a contractor to a system simply through their own web browser, mitigating all the risks potentially of exposing a laptop via a traditional VPN into your system that you don't have any control over. Now, at the same time, whilst we're just talking specifically about remote access, this then also opens up the possibility of using this to provide interacting and integrating with both isolation technology and cloud security technology to really provide a holistic access platform into cloud applications. You want to allow your users to get into a box account that your business partner uses, but you don't want to allow them to upload certain privileged content. Well, now you can use things like browser isolation to give them access via a remote access tool, route them via isolation to get there, and protect your organization from that potential data loss. So there's a whole series of key benefits here available across this new way of thinking with zero trust network access into not only your corporate infrastructure, but more so cloud resources. There's so many more applications now are not within the bounds of a corporate network or a corporate-owned data center, but are either public cloud services or SaaS-based delivery models. And then the final area that I've had a lot of discussions with organizations is the concern around insider threats. And again, this is something that a lot of organizations are now concerned with as they've moved a lot of staff that are typically working in an office to a home environment, where again, they don't have the visibility perhaps that they used to have by routing everybody through firewalls, where they can actually start to monitor and observe traffic. Now, from an insider threat point of view, we can really break this down into 3 different areas. Firstly, that kind of inadvertent loss. Somebody who maybe sticks stuff on a USB stick that they shouldn't do, or just simply shares something accidentally with a third party that they didn't mean to. But we've also got this issue of this malicious data loss. Maybe somebody that is siphoning off sensitive data and selling it for profit illegally. Or maybe somebody who's just left the organization, is working their notice and wants a list of all the account details. And then this third area within insider threat detection really focuses on that malicious threat actor who's got access into the account and being able to utilize this technology to solve this. So by utilizing an insider threat management tool, organizations can now monitor people wherever they're working on their corporate device through a very lightweight agent. Typically, that's how these sort of solutions work. They would deploy a lightweight agent that monitors activity within that endpoint. So they don't need to be connected to VPN. They don't need to be connected to a corporate network for network-based detection to work. But it builds a profile of that user and allows you to actually monitor for potential data loss to protect intellectual property from unauthorized and risky exfiltration. So really, that's the last area that I wanted to touch on today's webinar. So I just wanted to really share some predictions with you so that if you are looking to, and you are running a security awareness training campaign right now, and you're updating your people right now on the threats, maybe you want to consider notifying them to watch out for some of these areas. So it starts with new laws that we might see from a personal basis. So we believe that we're going to start seeing, and we've already started to observe this actually in the last couple of days, emails now purporting to come from the company talking about how they're going to get back to work in an office environment, how they're going to start easing controls as lockdown eases. how they're going to handle things like traveling to work notifications and controls around PPE and mask usage from a work context, especially if you're in things like manufacturing, as manufacturing is starting to restart now across the UK. We've also seen a whole series of new laws that we think are going to be related to financial. So we're going to see, furlough payment-based things as that starts to end. We're going to see companies starting to struggle, and we're going to see business partners now struggling with bankruptcy issues and payment notifications. So we believe we're going to see the threat actors leveraging this, pretending to be organizations saying we need to delay payments or we need to make a payment into a different account. So we believe we're going to see an uptick in lures here, as well as travel repayment-based lures that we think we're going to start seeing more of. As people now start to deal with that corporate travel issue that they've had, they're now starting to think, right, how do we actually start opening up things again? How do we deal with the issues of all this cancelled business travel? So just a few thoughts to think about. And then I want to finish today's session just by talking about a few recommendations. And I've talked about a few of these throughout. But for us, I really want to talk about technology to start with. First and foremost, I really urge everybody to make sure that you're deploying the best advanced malware analysis technology. You're doing as good a job as you can to stop as many threats coming in. Secondly, think about how you're deploying your URL click time protection. Are you just doing something that's just going to check to see whether it's known bad at the point of access? Or can you do more? Can you deploy a solution that's going to perhaps use things like browser isolation technology to lock down those malicious URLs further, but also to provide things like webmail access in a secure fashion? Outside of email, think about how you're monitoring for account compromise attempts and consider how you can automate the remediation of this. As an example, we've worked very closely with Okta to build an integration between ourselves and Okta that will automate the step-up authentication, that will provide Okta with our threat intelligence when they're deciding whether or not to allow access in and what sort of permissions to apply to that. And then finally, from a technology point of view, think about considering what sort of zero trust policy that you can move to for remote work and cloud access. I think now is the time that many organizations are looking at this and thinking, right, now is the time we think about changing the way we provide access for people moving forward, as we know that we're probably going to be in a semi-work from home state for quite some time. In fact, I note the other day that Twitter have now said that they're moving to a work from home forever policy for anyone that wants to. So again, I think this is going to change how people are providing access. But then from a people point of view, there's some key things that really everybody should be able to do. You really, really need to understand who your most attacked people are. That is critical. We know from our own data that top 20 people in that organization of 2,000 users, that top 1%, even in larger organization, represents a huge amount of risk incomparable to that overall risk. And that means that you can move from this one-size-fits-all policy that so many organizations still have to tailoring the technology you have, but also tailoring the security education that you run for your organization. I would urge everybody to consider what phishing simulation exercises that you run, but, and I caveat this with caution, I'm not going to comment on whether or not you should be using COVID-based lures. I've seen complete polar opposite opinions here, so I'll leave you to consider that yourself. But what this allows us to do is then actually utilize really relevant security awareness training based on the attacks that people are actually facing, and which of the lures you run through phishing simulation the majority of people are actually falling for. On a slightly separate note, one of the key things that I would recommend as an organization is that you consider updating how you deal with financial transactions and changes, and consider a completely out of band process for validation. So you don't change account details, you don't make a payment unless you have an out of band confirmation via telephone or another means. with the person instructing you to. And if you mandate that by policy within an organization, then that can go a great way to reducing this risk of BEC. The other thing that I would suggest is whether you consider updating your employee communication protocols. How are you communicating with your employees? And I've recommended a lot of organizations actually officially notify their staff that through this process of notifications around COVID, they will be sending no links and no attachments in any communication email, and to create a portal that you can just point people to. So you send an email out and you say, we've updated our policy, go to our portal to access the latest details. Then categorically, you can say, if you get any email from us that contains a URL and attachment, you know it's not from us and do not click it. And that goes a huge way in protecting your employees from lures pretending to be your organization with notification emails at these times. So from a Proofpoint perspective, we wanted to help organizations, both Proofpoint customers and people that are not customers. So we've actually made our Proofpoint Meta, our remote access technology, available to all Proofpoint enterprise customers at no charge until September. So if you're still struggling with VPN access and you are a Proofpoint customer of any of our solutions, then do contact your account manager. But from a security awareness training point of view, we've made 2 modules completely free and available. You do not need to deploy the full platform to make use of these. We've actually hosted them separately outside of our main platform. The first of these is a attack spotlight video around COVID-19 lures. It's a very well produced video that you can make available to your staff, talking about what to expect and how the threat actors are using these lures and what to look out for. Now, the second training module we've made available for free is a remote worker tailored training module, simply talking through the best practices when working remotely and working from outside the corporate network. And again, that's available. Both of these can be found through our security awareness training page within our website. But I would urge you to speak to your either Proofpoint or Bytes account manager, who can actually direct you and help you and guide you. We can provide you all the documentation and program guides to actually deploy both of these from a programmatic point of view. I also want to quickly just draw attention to the Okta offer. Okta have got an offer as well for their core access tools during this time. So I hope this has been useful to you. From a Proofpoint point of view, if you're not familiar with our complete portfolio, maybe you just know us from email. We have solutions that cover not only email threat protection, but through to cloud account protection. We've got a series of both access products and information protection products across insider threat management, cloud security, and email DLP, as well as a series of compliance options across email archiving and further information archiving options, as well as supervision and social selling compliance portfolio. So if you'd like to learn more, then a great resource is not only our human factor report from last year, but we will soon be publishing our quarterly threat update. It's not available yet, but it will be in the next few weeks, and that will go into a lot more detail around the landscape over the last 3 months, breaking down in a lot more detail what I've seen. Also, if you would like us to help with a free assessment, we have a security risk assessment that's available. It takes 1 or 2 hours of any company's time, and we will plug our technology in for a couple of weeks to monitor email traffic, to monitor your use of your email domains externally, and your cloud account access, and can come up and give you a lot of this very attack person-based reporting that we talked about in here, free of charge. So again, if that is of interest to you, then please do see your account manager at Bytes. So I'm going to hand back to the Bytes team now just to close out. Thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you for that, Richard. So we've got one question here for you. With regards to the tools, do you have to roll them out to the whole company at once, or?
No, and actually one of the things that we recommend is that once you understand who the most attacked people are, to deploy those tools to those individuals. One example, for instance, is our isolation technology. The way I advise a lot of our customers to deploy that is to deploy URL isolation for all URLs and email for those top attacked people. And that's all you do to start with. Get comfortable with the technology. Then perhaps as a second stage, you want to roll it out to a wider audience. And that's the point where, for instance, you then just isolate suspicious websites for everybody else. So you get the right balance between risk and business impact. And again, the same applies to security awareness training. So, very much a case of using the visibility that you can get through a little bit of research to better protect your organization through this more tailored approach.
That's great. So we haven't got any more questions at this point. If you do have any questions, please quickly drop them in or send them to tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's attended. I know it's tough to take some time off of your normal day jobs to attend these, so we do appreciate it. And thank you very much to Richard for presenting to us. We are sure everybody's found it very useful. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.